Right, so today we have Miss Trudy Watt, an assistant professor at UW Milwaukee. Through her work, she seeks to cultivate equitable access to well-being through corro- corroboration um, and through collaborative advancements in design, healthcare, and civics. Sounds like that's what our talk will be about. So I'll hand it over to Trudy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciate that introduction. I'd also like to just thank you all for being here and thank you for having me and my colleagues, Stephen Rasmussen and Izzy Cosentino, who I'll let introduce themselves.
Yeah, so I'm Stephen. I'm a graduate researcher at UW Milwaukee. I've been with the group phase 3 for, well, I guess its entirety now. Almost going on 2 years. It's pretty great. I started as an undergrad and kind of progressing through. It's been amazing for my schooling and everything like that. But yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys about this stuff.
All right, and I'm Izzy. I'm going to be a junior at UWM, and I just joined phase 3 on June 1st. And yeah, I've just been getting to know everyone and learning a lot about the group. But yeah, it's really fun so far.
Yeah, Izzy and Stephen, I'm really glad that we're able to do this together. And as you'll hear from us, one of the hallmarks of our brand of design research at phase 3 at the School of Architecture and Urban Planning at UWM is that we're non-hierarchical and collaborative. So even though I'm the assistant professor on the team, and what's traditionally known as a PI, Stephen, Izzy, and all the rest of our colleagues have sort of equal responsibility for developing work, co-authoring papers, developing projects together, coming up with the ideas that we pursue. That's really, really important to us. So that's one of the reasons that we're here as a group to talk with you today. I just wanted to let you know that we're very conversational. So please feel free to raise a hand, jump on the microphone, throw a comment or a question into the chat at any time. We'll make space for comments and questions, but you're also welcome to just join in whenever you want. We're also kind of a nice small group here, so I feel like we can really have a good, open discussion. The thing that we wanted to start with was to ask you a question. So if you would give this a whirl, this is an app called VBox, we're gonna generate a word cloud together in response to this question. You can join the VBox poll by going to vbox.app and entering this meeting ID 144318387 or scanning the QR code. And you can do that on a phone or a web browser. We'll just make sure that the poll is started. Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and show results. You can enter one or more responses and imagine a time you felt very comfortable and at ease. Where were you? What was the space like? I see neutral, nature, and green come right up. It's interesting. Any other thoughts? Yeah, nice. Home, hiking, ooh, friends, welcoming. Hiking's got a couple now. I totally agree with that.
I like the color green too here. It's really nice. Some visual experience.
Mm-hmm. I like that there's experiential things too, like welcoming, friends, music. So I love that those are coming up as parts of the environment. I think quiet and food are separate, but they came up as quiet food, which I really like the sound of.
Yeah, I was reading it that way too.
Awesome. Laughter, that's great. Yeah, so thank you for jumping in just to get us started. Imagining our relationship to the environment, and in particular, the things that put us at ease about it. And we'll return to this idea throughout the afternoon here. Just to adjust this so you can't see the top bar. Okay. So we've already introduced ourselves, Izzy, Stephen, and Trudy. My email is at the bottom of this slide. I'll also share it with you again at the end and put it in the chat. Very happy to answer questions and be in touch with you after this. So, what we're going to do is talk about design research for architecture and well-being, all around the idea of social cohesion, inclusion, and health equity. And for us, one of the first principles that drives our work is the idea from scholar Jonathan Gottschall that human beings are storytelling animals, that's one of the things that sets us apart or makes us distinct from other creatures on this planet, is that storytelling is a main mode of our way of relating to each other, being connected with each other, conveying our experience. That's also the root of design principle for us around care and empathetic design, which is not only an ethic, but a practice, which builds on this idea of storytelling, because caring design or inclusive design is 100% rooted in learning each other's stories. We can't design for each other or with each other if we don't know each other's stories pretty deeply. We also know that science is agreeing with this to prove that we actually need to pay attention to these, caring, loving, mushy, smushy, soft things, that's really, really important, of course, to our emotional well-being, but also to managing our cognitive load, connecting with ideas about extended mind. We also know that the science of empathy is telling us that people perform better when they're in an empathetic, or more specifically, compassionate environment, which has to do with one's compassion to oneself, compassion to others. And we would propose that as architects, we need that in order to create compassionate environments that can support the well-being of others, not just when they're going to see a physician or in a state of illness or injury, but all of the time. The other thing that we believe is that architecture is really uniquely positioned to deal with some of the major challenges in healthcare and well-being and inclusion, because it's not exactly science, it's not exactly art, it's kind of this in-between or liminal or ambiguous field, especially in its contemporary practice, which we'll also circle back around to later. It's kind of a both and discipline that borrows from a lot of different fields and applies knowledge in a generalist way with this special medium of architecture, which includes making buildings, writing about buildings, making drawings about buildings, making models of buildings. So we're fundamentally communicators as architects, which of course connects with this idea of human beings being storytelling animals. Some of the reasons that some of the ways that we know this is urgent is sorry, I lost there we go. We know that health and well-being are directly impacted by the physical environment. Maybe you've already talked in this research program or symposium about the idea of redlining, or maybe you've encountered it before. So redlining was a practice by financial institutions to draw literally lines around parts of the city. This is actually a redlining map of Philadelphia, which is where I lived before I moved to Milwaukee and joined the faculty here. You can see that the detrimental influences that are listed in the redlined areas have to do with economic class. So these are laborers, they're foreign born. There are commentaries about race, about income, about families on relief, or what we might now call welfare. So these are populations of people that were marginalized by financial institutions. And the way that resonates still today is in the sort of commonly heard refrain that your zip code determines your health outcomes more than your genetic code. So as an example, in the city of Chicago, a person who lives in the loop of downtown Chicago will likely live on average about 20 years longer than residents of Washington Park, just a few L stops away to the south. So there is a major impact to health and well-being. And I should add, in a red line neighborhood, formerly red line neighborhood, just 8 L stops to the south. So the impact of that delineation or that boundary making around populations who were or weren't of value, or weren't of a sort of superior stock based on a variety of racial and economic characteristics, still has a major impact and can help us actually predict how long a person will live even today. Another piece of evidence that we have is the Ulrich study of 1984. So, I always like to point out that this was done in 1984 because nothing that we're doing is new or new knowledge. It's actually been around for quite a little while. But I can tell you that as I'm like a mid-career architect now, I guess. I never learned about this in school, and it blew me away that this was a thing in the world that no one told me about. So the Ulrich study was a study that correlated a view from a window with recovery time and other factors for a number of patients recovering from the same surgery. So all of these patients were recovering from the same surgery, and the simple distinction of whether they were able to view a tree or a brick wall from their hospital bed determined or had an influence on the length of their stay at the hospital, the complications that they experienced in recovery, and the amount of pain medication that they requested from the nursing staff. So that is an architectural maneuver. As an architect, when I determine, I can see a window behind Cecilia, I don't know what it is looking out at. That's a decision that an architect makes. What am I looking at from the window? This is all a part of positioning architecture as a part of what are known as the social determinants of health. So these are non-medical factors that influence your health and well-being all the time. In this diagram, you can see there are things like food, your social environment, your genetics, your physical environment. So that's the sort of territory that we're operating in, your work experience, your education, like many, many factors outside of direct medical factors. We in particular, so in order to investigate this relationship, we look at the experiences of older adults and other vulnerable populations in the built environment. And we're really excited to be expanding from older adults into other populations as well. So we look at the way that architecture is influencing the experiences, positive and negative, of vulnerable populations to help make really clear that architecture is having an influence for everyone all the time. It's just the most obvious when we work with a vulnerable population. So here you can see, this is actually from the field of gerontology, where it's been discovered that there are 3 main factors that influence the health and quality of life of older adults, especially those experiencing dementia or cognitive decline. And the 3 factors are the pharmacological environment. So you can see here this arc of the quality of life over time. So the pharmacological environment, or the medicine you take, it has an influence. The next highest, the blue line, includes the pharmacological environment and supportive and caring environments. So those are our social connections, our communities, our friendships, our family relationships. And finally, when the physical environment comes in, enabling physical and technical environments, we see the greatest, the highest quality of life, or what we would call the highest quality of life, highest quality of health span across the lifespan. Now I'm going to hand it over to Stephen. So those are kind of our first principles and why we feel this is urgent work around equity and inclusion in architecture and well-being. And Stephen and Izzy are going to share some examples of how we understand this, how we see it working in the built environment.
Yeah, so right away, if we go all the way back to about 9000 BC, we find the remains of Göbekli Tepe. And these ruins consist of these like large T-shaped megaliths. You can see that in the center here. And these are all made with tools, stone tools, not metal, which is amazing. And about 11,000 years old. So what's so interesting about these sites is that they existed before that development of tools, the development of pottery, before settlements were established and all that. And they predate Stonehenge by about 6,000 years. So it's important to note again that people didn't live here. They were still nomadic, and they traveled and they gathered and they kind of roamed the lands, and then would actually congregate here and build these together as a communal activity, raising these areas as these ritual sites. And in fact, looking at these, as Trudy starts to kind of flip through these to show you guys this stuff, they're huge. They're ginormous, right? And they're all filled with these intricate carvings and storytelling features all around it. And in fact, one of the archaeologists who worked on here, his name was Ian Hodder. He said that this shows that social cultural changes come first, and then agricultural changes come second, which goes against everything that we kind of have thought up until now, where we thought that the scarcity of resources and stuff like that is what kind of brought us together. When in fact, we've been kind of doing this the whole time. It's kind of in our nature. And that helps to start understand the importance of communication, of empathy, along with other overlooked things like feelings, those squishy things that we know from science are a really big part of our extended mind and community-based interactions, these things that make us people and communities, and the importance of those smushy stuff and the impact on our relationships to the built environment. Going further, observations from Colin Ellard's book, it's called Places of the Heart, points out that architecture was, not a dwelling and not a storage facility. It's in fact a place of gathering and relationship building, which further complicates our modern understanding of the famous phrase that form follows function, which maybe not. And then if we move further, a little less far back in time, we end up at the 19th century and a woman named Florence Nightingale. She's a social reformer, best known for her advocacy and innovations in improving health conditions and mortality rates for wounded soldiers. It started specifically in the Crimean War. That's around 1855. But her observations on hospitals and living conditions kind of continued after that. So her and a group of nurses all took observations of hospitals and other places the wounded were being held. This is things like medical tents and stuff like that on the battlefield, and started to theorize how best to alter the built environment to reduce the spread of disease and sickness. This in turn really revolutionized hospitals and later sanitary work environments. So here's a couple examples from her book, which are notes on hospitals. The first slide that we went past there was just indicating that corners are bad, especially for ventilation. So she writes, all closed corners stagnate the air, more or less, even where the building forms but three sides of a square, as in figure 3, unless the wings are so short that they can hardly be called wings. So unless it's just a straight wall. Her solution then is to make these block plans, which house specifically and enclose different community wards and padded rooms, bathrooms, things like that, and then connect them with a open circulation system that is free for ventilation and reduces kind of the spread of these diseases. So if we continue, you can see this is what she was dealing with at the time, which are these huge long corridors, and all those rectangles with X's are patients' beds. It's kind of the plan view of the building here. And so these huge long corridors without proper distancing, as we know for today, and without proper ventilation really allowed the sickness just to kind of spread and go all throughout the place. Her solution to that then is these A right here, those indicate the wards. So this is where the sick are going to be housed, is to kind of spread them out and have them be of their own area. They're really not allowing for the spread, but also a ton of openings and all these open indications you can see. I can't click on it. I wish I could. But they also have their own bathrooms, their own washrooms, everything's their own. So you're not kind of walking past each other or doing anything like this. These are really simple observations, but really kind of detrimental, or maybe influential, I should say, to how we look at these things, because her observations and work in this field truly revolutionized how hospitals care for the sick and how best to keep them safe from the spread of the disease and further sickness, which isn't something that was really considered before.
All right. My video is still not working, so you guys are just gonna have to listen to me. But this is a maternity waiting village, and it is a development by Mass. And this village was essentially created for women in Malawi to easily access resources to prevent mortality from complications during childbirth. And in Malawi, about 1 in 36 women have risks of dying during pregnancy or delivery. And all of this is essentially preventable. So they just created these resources for women to just access while they're pregnant and during their delivery. And these facilities include education areas, or just like small spaces for the mothers to earn income while they're on maternity leave, to make up for all the wage loss for like during their pregnancy. And some of like the structural elements of this like development, sorry, I'm like switching. Okay, there we go. Some of like the structural elements are that the walls of the maternity structure, they absorb solar rays, so it can heat the structure during the night, and it is incredibly sustainable, and all the materials of the building were locally sourced. All right, and here are just some images of the village. And this is actually the second development. The first one was a prototype that I don't know if they have any like images of it, but it was just like not good. So this is like the final product of it. All right, and this is another development by Mass, and it's a memorial for peace and justice. And this is in Montgomery, Alabama. And this is a little bit of a like heavy subject for like a lot of people to hear. But this memorial was essentially created to tell the stories of victims of lynching across the US. And the memorial is like highly interactive. So there's screens everywhere. So you can really like experience everything that's going on. And it's quite like uncomfortable, and it's really sensitive. And I guess it's just like something that other people like will never experience. So this is something where you can actually like experience it as much as possible, if that makes sense. And the memorial has, I don't know if there's an image of it. If you saw like those like huge hanging, like, yeah, there we go. They're everywhere. There's about 800 of them. And those are all to resemble those we lost victims of lynching. All right, and I said that there's like television screens everywhere to make the memorial like highly interactive. And these screens show like videos and pictures of Black men, women, and children in prison cells to resemble the narrative of like enslavement, lynching, segregation, and mass incarceration, and how the history of Black people and how it has slowly like developed into the current situation it is today. So it started all with slavery, and then mass incarceration and the treatment of Black people have been the result of everything that's happened in America. So that is what this memorial represents. And it's a pretty touchy subject, but it is extremely well done. And it essentially shows how people who can't have, or who have never experienced this, how they can experience it through the eyes of like Black people in this country who have been victims of violence. All right.
Thanks, Stephen and Izzy.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so so far we've sort of outlined a few pieces of evidence around architecture and well-being, you know, why we would even be looking at this. Stephen and Izzy took you through a few examples of what others have done in the field, going back to the oldest known built structures at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Fast forwarding to the 19th century and Florence Nightingale's work to reduce soldier mortality during the Crimean War. And then Izzy shared the two contemporary examples from Mass Design Group around reducing maternal mortality in Malawi and reflecting traumatic national narrative and exposing that to the experience of all through the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. So now I'm gonna, in our third part of our short presentation before we go to breakout rooms, I'm gonna share, this is very much work in progress. Our team just started in February 2020. So we'll share 3 projects that we're working on in this area of design for equity, architecture, and well-being. So we are using a storytelling methodology called time slips, which was developed by UWM's Ann Basting to have improvisational conversations with communities of older adults that are not specifically about architecture, but from which we can glean spatial and experiential information using a machine learning analysis process. So essentially what we're trying to do is tell stories with people over and over and over again, and then find out some information about what their experiences in the environment have been without even asking directly. And one of the ways I like to talk about this is the reason that we would do this is that oftentimes when I sit down at a table as an architect and I say to a person like, okay, let's talk about the architecture you want, I either have a person who has a ton of ideas of what they like, or someone who says, I don't have the education, don't have the information, I can't draw, I'm not a creative person, I can't have a conversation about this. And it's more often the latter than the former. That happens on an even bigger scale when we're starting to talk about designing for community, where we meet with a great variety of people. So what we're really trying to do is make a connection between people who don't think they can talk about architecture and reflective, inclusive design, so through storytelling and machine learning. Another way I like to describe this is we're trying to pick up on the subtle traces of people's experience using the power of machine learning, which allows us to look at a lot more data than we could do with our mere human eyeballs. So time slips is a creative communication methodology that uses storytelling and what are called beautiful questions, which are open-ended, gently provocative questions meant to generate stories in groups. When you run a time slip session, you might use a beautiful question such as, what do you treasure in your home and why? And pair it with a story pair it with an image in order to collaboratively compose a story together. So this is an image from Time Slip's website that shows older adults in the midst of a storytelling session. They're arranged in a circle around a narrator who's physically writing down the story that they tell as it is told. In real time. We let go completely of any notion of needing to make sense or have a plot or have consistent characters. It's simply about creating together in an improvisational, imaginative way that does not rely on memory. That's really, really important, especially for older adults experiencing dementia or other forms of cognitive decline who may not be able to storytell based on memory. It might even be painful to suggest that they do so. So this is all about creating together improvisationally. As you can imagine, we have not been able to do this in person during the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a team, we developed a virtual format for storytelling. Here you can see the way that we use Miro on the left here, hello, to physically write down the story. So there's still an experience of seeing a story come to life on the page and images on the right. So this is very much a work in progress. We're developing an image library. We're developing relationships with communities who want to be a part of our study to find out how much spatial and experiential information we might get from stories like this that aren't specifically about architecture, but may help us learn something about what older adults are experiencing in the places that they live, specifically in places like nursing homes or other congregate living settings. Another way that we do this, that we're working on connecting healthcare or well-being and architecture is through a project that we call Connecting Design and Science, where we run workshops with community members, architecture students who have little to no experience in designing with older adults. We present a very limited set of information and then run what's called a design charrette to develop many, many drawings in a rapid format. So we get sketches like this. Here we're testing the degree to which novices to gerontology and to designing for older adults can help us generate visual information that is related to the scientific evidence about what supports quality of life for older adults. So these sketches that you're seeing are from people, they are sketches of environments for aging by people who have never designed an environment for aging based on scientific information that, Stephen, Izzy, and I might convey in a very short workshop format. So this is seeing the degree to which we can put together scientific evidence and architects' ability to draw many things, draw many stuffs very, very fast to help facilitate person-centered care or the best practices in the physical environment. That can be kind of tough because a lot of that evidence is often kind of locked up in scientific papers that can be really, really dense. And even if you're used to reading scientific papers, you can imagine if you're an overburdened caregiver, nurse, physician caring for many, many people over the course of a day, it's highly unlikely that you have the free time or the brain power or the desire at the end of that workday to read the scientific papers that convey all of that evidence. So we're really curious to see where architects can come in and help support making sure that information gets into the hands of caregivers without them having to read through those super dense articles. And the very last thing that we're going to share before going into the breakout rooms, we can't talk about what we're doing as a team without talking about how we're doing it. We're in the field of architecture, which is notorious for being very competitive, there being long hours. So we're really looking for a compassionate, highly trusting and collaborative way to do design research together. We do that for a couple of reasons. One, it's a whole lot nicer to work in that environment ourselves. And two, when we treat ourselves and our teammates with compassion and take time for reflection, we believe that we will be able to develop more compassionate environments for others. And that without treating ourselves and our teammates with that compassion and reflection and patience as we develop work, there wouldn't be any way for us to provide that for others. And if we miss that opportunity, as many have been missing that opportunity for years and years, we won't be able to make those positive connections between architecture and health that we've been talking about so far in this talk. So this is what we call the phase 3 reflection and team gauge. We call it the PI for short. So this is a reflection and measurement tool that we've been developing to help us amplify and commit and recommit to our key principles as design researchers, which are compassion, variety, focus, organization, communication, and identity. So every time we do a project, we use this tool to sort of create a team fingerprint to see how we did in that project, where do we have strengths and where do we have limitations. So this is a sort of meta project, which is in fact our team itself. So given that, this is a great moment to just transition into giving you all an opportunity for reflection and conversation. We're going to move into 2 breakout rooms. And we've got these prompts for you. So both Stephen and Izzy will be leading the 2 breakout rooms. The prompts that we have for you, I will drop into the chat in just a minute. I'm also going to make some space here for any questions that you might have before we go into those smaller groups. The first prompt is, how does what we've shared today connect with your experience of the physical environment? Is there an example or a story that you have from your experience where you can now say that you were experiencing wellness because of something in the physical environment? You can remember a room that you were always really happy in, or a moment of awe when you visited a particular building or park or place. Another prompt is, has storytelling come up in other areas? Can you see other areas in your life where storytelling can or does play a role in connecting you with others, building community, supporting your well-being, or supporting the well-being of others? And finally, our beautiful open-ended question, is architecture just buildings? So it's not a test. You don't have to race through all three of them. They're here just to support conversation. Hopefully everyone will get a turn to talk. But with that, let me ask you if there are any questions before we move into the breakout rooms. Sign when I close the Oh, I always take it as a good sign when no one comes back from early from the breakout room. So I hope that means that there were some great conversations going on. Okay, can you all see my screen share still? Awesome. Okay, so with just a few minutes left, I wanted to share another reflection practice with you all that I actually learned from a course that I'm doing called Applied Compassion Training with the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, that is called Harvesting the Gems. So as a way of just sort of sharing our experience before we depart, I'd love to ask anyone who'd like to share, to just share out either by typing it into the chat or, if I can see your hand, you can raise your hand and come on the microphone. But the idea is like, what are one or two gems that you're taking away from today? A new discovery, a reflection, something that resonated with something you've experienced. Please, yeah, just feel free to raise your hand to share out or put something into the chat. Nice, I see Lauren's hand.
I think one thing I'm taking away is that it's not just the emotional connection between people and like the people itself that come into areas